good morning officially for the long-awaited Sam Katz. Sam, we're so happy to have you here. And I know you're coming from a crisis in your office, and we appreciate your being with us. Sam is, it's a great honor to introduce Sam Katz. For those of you who do not know him, he is a Philadelphia and a Mount Airy treasure. So we're really fortunate to have him here. He has had an unusual career in politics and civil life, and now in filmmaking. In 1976, Sam joined the Public Financial Management Incorporated, which is a municipal financial advisory firm, and he began a 20-year stint with them in which he arranged financing for major projects such as the Orlando Airport, Atlanta Transit System, sports stadiums including Camden Yards, Philadelphia's Wachovia, now the Wells Fargo Center, and the home of the Miami Dolphins. In the financial crisis in this city in 1991, Sam then stepped forward and ran for mayor in the Republican primary. He ran again in 1999 and in 2003, and I have to say in both of those mayoral races in this Democratic town, he drew a lot of Democratic support. So he was a compelling candidate whom I supported, gotta say. He also then ran for governor in 1994. He's been the CEO of Philadelphia First, which is a civic group here. He created a venture capital firm which has invested in Philadelphia area tech companies and biotech startups, and has helped form BioAdvance, which he now chairs. He was the chair of PICA, which is the agency charged with the fiscal oversight of the city, and he just recently resigned from that, provoking a lot of people to say, so are you gonna run third time's a charm? Are you gonna run for mayor? There's gonna be a job opening, but so far that has, I think Connie has, Nick, killed that, yeah, okay. So, but what's also really exciting in the How I Reinvented My Life narrative is what Sam has been doing in the last 7 years, and that is to create an epic series on the history of Philadelphia, one episode at a time, and we have a number of historians here I know will be very interested, called Philadelphia, the Great Experiment. He's able to gather scholars and people of interest around different topics. I've been involved with a little bit the yellow fever epidemic and with the work on women. He's now doing an episode, a webisode on Catholic history in the city. So he can tell you much more about this, but this is an exciting and unique documentation of our great city. And so we're so pleased to have Sam with us. He lives right down the street in West Mount Airy. He and his wife Connie are active members of Germantown Jewish Center. They have 4 grown children, 2 of whom live in Philadelphia. And how many grandchildren?
1 and 1 on the way.
1 and 1 on the way. So please join me in welcoming Sam Katz.
Good morning. First, let me thank you, Katie, for inviting me and for being patient with me, and to all of you. I apologize. I went to the office this morning knowing I was going to be here to deal with a problem. We're shooting, well, we just finished shooting 10 days of what are called reenactments, where we shoot the scenes that we want to incorporate into The episodes that will be forthcoming covering 1720 to 1750 and 1750 to 1790. These are not the two episodes that are on the screen. The problem with 1720 to 1790 is that this is the sweet spot of Philadelphia history. 1720 to 1750, there's a guy named Franklin who comes to Philadelphia, and 1750 to 1790, they have this little revolution. And so the challenge for us is, how do you do these two stories, which we all know everything about Franklin, and we all know everything about the revolution, and 95% of what we know is wrong, never mind. But how do we do this in a way that will be engaging, enlightening, and provide people with new perspectives, not on the revolution, but on Philadelphia's role in that period? And of course, we're talking about a century in which Philadelphia was the American center. So that's just this morning, we learned something about having missed a couple shots. And at $40,000 a day, shooting reenactments, missing a couple shots turns out to be a little bit of a crisis. So anyway, I thought I was going to leave at 11:15. Truthfully, I left at 11:15, and fortunately encountered none of Philadelphia's finest on my way here. Because I think I went through 7 red lights, I'm not kidding. Anyway, and then he was. And I got on Allen's Lane. I live on Allen's Lane. And I got on Allen's Lane, and all of a sudden, the Wawa truck just decides that he's going to double park in the middle of Allen's Lane. So I thought that what I would do is show you a little bit of the episode that covers the founding of the city, which is really the life story of Philadelphia through the lens of William Penn. And then, but not for very long, and then stop and talk a little bit about William Penn and both the aspirational aspects of Penn's community of religious utopia and toleration, and the conflicts, both in Penn's character and in the normal course of events that occurs when human beings get together and screw things up. We'll see, maybe we'll have to do a little sound work here, I don't know. It sounds pretty good. So, hello, Phil.
As Europe's largest city recovers from plague and fire, the son of a war hero sits in a jail cell. Held captive in the Tower of London, William Penn dares to challenge the Church of England.
He's a young radical. He's the son of an admiral, a gentleman, a theologian, a man of reason. He's all these things, sometimes at the same time.
He's enraptured with Quaker ideas about human equality, and this gets him into some serious trouble.
The only portrait we have of him is wearing armor. Good Quaker isn't supposed to do a thing like that.
In time, the young rebel will make a city, and his city will be the seed of a nation. For much of the 1600s, the English live in fear of constant warfare and disease. Both traumas mark young William Penn. From childhood, he wears a wig to hide the scars of smallpox. His father, Admiral Penn, is an ally of King Charles II.
His son didn't join the Anglican Church and be a good boy. His father was very unhappy with his son's nonconformity.
He's an outsider in his own home and an outsider in the larger English establishment. He takes up with other people who think as he does. This cadre of avant-garde thinkers call themselves Philadelphians, and gives him a sense that he's not crazy.
Angered by his son's disobedience, Admiral Penn sends William on a tour of France and Italy. William is not impressed. He recoils at the misery and suffering surrounding the opulent palaces, the frivolous playground of his own social class.
He's He's seen London, which burned in 1666. He's seen Paris and the extraordinary inequality of wealth, the salaciousness of the court, and the ridiculousness of pretension, and all those things rung untrue to him and wrong to him.
He imagines what he can do to mend the world. He sees plainly dressed preachers roaming the countryside, railing against war and material wealth. Inspired, William joins their fledgling movement, the Religious Society of Friends, or Quakers. Together, they boldly challenge the Church of England and face a violent backlash from the British government.
He's converted. He's preaching in the streets, and pretty soon he finds himself in jail for his association with these rabble-rousers.
William Penn writes a number of what are called subversive tracts, criticizing long-standing religion.
He's testing the limits of society. Trial by jury, no established church, a government of laws, not men. He tells the king he will not retract at all, even if the prison is his grave.
William's commitment eventually impresses even his father. Near death, Admiral Penn buys his son's release from jail and petitions James, the Duke of York, to shield William from England's laws of religious persecution.
The king owed a huge debt to William Penn's father for services to the crown during the English-Dutch War. Charles II is not able to square the debt with Admiral Penn before, unfortunately, Admiral Penn passes away, so the debt has passed to William Penn.
The king chooses to repay the debt not with money, but with land. He offers Penn a colony in North America, 45,000 square miles on the west side of the Delaware River.
In the New World, the English settlements were poorly protected, from the French to the north or the Spanish to the west. When William Penn volunteers his services as a colony creator, what the king hears him saying is, I am volunteering to create a buffer zone, and I will populate it with Quakers.
William Penn had a dream. He called it a holy experiment. He was talking about founding a government the like of which didn't exist anywhere.
At age 36, Penn has secured a canvas for his utopian dream. He wants to call it Sylvania, Latin for woods. But the king insists upon naming the colony for William's father, Admiral Penn. The rebellious young Quaker is now one of the largest landholders in the British Empire, the absolute proprietor of Pennsylvania. He arrives in his new territory on October 29th, 1682.
Lots of people came on those boats and they said, we're going to establish a utopia. Most of them didn't have the faintest idea what was necessary to have a functioning and successful city. William Penn did.
It is a clear and just thing, and my God, who has given it me through many difficulties, will, I believe, bless and make it the seed of a nation. William Penn, 1681.
Penn brings a vision for his capital, an enormous 10,000-acre city concentrated along the Delaware River. But there is not enough open land for such a large city.
Penn isn't the first to get here. There were Swedes here, Dutch, Finns, Native Americans. There is a robust population already here.
It was very difficult to figure out where to put the city and what that city would be like.
Penn sends Thomas Home, an experienced surveyor, to walk across the woods and meadows, marking future streets with his own steps. Home and Penn envision a new type of city, spacious enough to guard against the squalor of European capitals. They negotiate with Swedish farmers to buy their land.
Penn had experienced both the Great Fire of London and the plague. His view was that if the city was built with enough green space, that a fire couldn't decimate it.
Holmes' plan transforms Penn's sprawling idea into a distinctive town of square blocks and wide streets.
There would be no dark alleyways as in London or other European cities where vice might flourish in the shadows. Oh no.
Thomas Holmes comes up with an orderly grid pattern. There'll be the center square where City Hall is now. The city will go from river to river, from the Delaware to the Schuylkill.
And the grid becomes the pattern for American urban development up to the present day.
The principle of order, which is what Quakers were really about, is what resonates most. When that map went back to London, people were moved by it. Europe was in disorder, and wars and famine, overpopulation, all of these were push factors to get people to leave.
Penn names his city Philadelphia. He believes it will be a place that aspires to the Quaker ideal of brotherly love.
Brotherly love has its roots in the concept of liberty of conscience. What you believe is your business. This is something altogether new in Western history.
This God-intoxicated man sees Pennsylvania as a chance to create Philadelphia, the New Jerusalem. On the other hand, it's also a place for Penn to make lots of money.
In advertisements, Penn entices buyers with a three-part land deal: waterfront property in the city, parcels in the Liberty Lands north of town, and country farms in places like the Welsh Tract in Marionshire and Erdenheim in Springfield.
He's saying my city is going to have its own bank account, the agricultural hinterland. We're going to be not just a colonial extraction port, we're going to be a city.
Word of mouth traveled back across the ocean that the founders of the colony had in their minds the best interests of the colonists.
Pennsylvania, by what you call the Delaware River today, is the historic homeland of the Lenape people.
When William Penn arrived, Native Americans had already been dealing with Europeans on some level for over 100 years, but the scale was radically different. For the Lenape, this represented a greater threat because a larger group of people would require more land.
Penn and his agents seek out Lenape chiefs in late 1682.
All right, so let me make a couple of funny observations. First of all, as you probably saw, William Penn's wig makes me nauseous. William Penn wore a wig because he was bald, and not because it was just the fashion of the day, which of course it was. So, but I see that wig. It was a very cheap wig, and the hair strands are out there. The other thing I will tell you is that we could never get our William Penn to do anything but smile. Things were not that good, and there should have been a little bit of emotional chaos in Penn's experience here, but this particular reenactor just was having so much fun. Anyway, I want to make a couple of points. Penn is a remarkable guy. You'll later, when I show you the end of this, he's really the only founder of an urban area who 300 years later we're still talking about. Partly because we've pedestalized him. We put him on top of City Hall. It's always a bad place to be on top of a pedestal. We remember that our city is the city of brotherly love, no matter how many times we have watched ourselves perform at the 800 level of the Veterans Stadium when that was around. We are a city that probably still aspires to, and as Shan Holt says a little later, this is what kind of dogs us as a community, that we have this title, brotherly love, this aspirational human quality that we fail to live up to, as would be expected, because we've introduced the element of human beings into this utopia, and they came along and did their thing. The contradictions, though, existed virtually from the get-go. Penn, who is a man of extraordinary brilliance, who wrote prolifically about government, religion, relationships. He even conceived of a notion of a League of Nations in the 17th century that predates the creation of the League of Nations and the United Nations by 2 centuries. So he was a guy who was doing a lot of thinking. But he grew up in an aristocratic family. His father was a merchant and a seaman and made a lot of money, not only trading and sailing, but also in lands. And young Penn spent a fair amount of time in Ireland attending to the family estates. And if you know anything about the relationship between Great Britain, or Britain, England, and Ireland, you know that that wasn't pretty. And it wasn't pretty in the case of the Penn family. Penn was raised to be a lawyer. He went to a college, mostly it was a bar, but he went to a college, and I don't mean a bar in the sense of the law, it was a tavern where he was trained in law. So this is where his frame of government and his reference around management of societies through government was grounded. He was part of, and I don't think Mike Zuckerman quite made the point, or we didn't quite emphasize the point, he was part of a social network, long before there was a Facebook and a Twitter, which were involved great thinkers in Europe, in France, in Belgium, in Germany, or in the Palatine, in England and Spain, who communicated with each other by mail. And they called their society the Philadelphians, which is where the name actually comes from. So this idea of ideas, this idea of religious toleration, this idea of a place where you could practice no matter what your religion, was really quite unique. Think to the north, New England, founded by Puritans, Calvinists, who, by the way, burned Quakers at the stake because their religion was so antithetical to the puritanical mindset about how to practice. And wherever you went in New England, you encountered congregational churches. To the south, Maryland had a substantial Catholic population. The Calverts were Catholic, the Carrolls were Catholic, and the charter granted Catholic. Now, eventually the Protestants came in and drove the Catholics north to Philadelphia. Further south, the Anglicans really dominated Virginia. So the idea that you could come to a place and you could be Lutheran, you could be Methodist, you could be Baptist, you could be Catholic, as long as you didn't do it too publicly. You couldn't be Jewish too much. That didn't go over too well. And ideas of toleration in Penn's mind meant toleration of other Protestants. It really didn't extend to other forms, the main form of Christianity prior to the Reformation, which was Catholicism. And of course, in England, Quakers were threatening because they were like Catholics. They seemed to be like Catholics. And anything that threatened the unification of the Anglican Church and the monarchy was a threat to the sanctity and future of England. So with one fell swoop, Charles gets rid of Penn and the debt to his father, a debt of £16,000. And here's where the contradiction in Penn's character starts to take root. He had a great lifestyle. I don't think you could see it on the map, but one of the things that Penn did when he came to Philadelphia was he established, through the Thomas Home Plan, which was more than the grid, it was the whole region, three lower counties, which today are the state of Delaware, and 3 counties in Pennsylvania, Chester, Bucks, and Philadelphia. And Penn immediately took in the plan 5 manors, each of which are 10,000 acres in their original form. One of which Pennsbury is still available and is one of the best museums and heritage sites in Philadelphia along the Delaware, and where most of the footage here was shot. Another one was called Springettsbury, and this is the one to me that's actually the most interesting. If you think of Philadelphia as, in its original form, Vine to South, Vine to Cedar, Vine, by the way, was once called, it was the name of a tree. Just as an aside, everyone who came to Philadelphia with Penn decided what they were going to name the streets. One of the first streets was named Wynn, as in Thomas Wynn. And Penn said, we're not naming the streets after anything except the trees. So each street was lined with trees, most of which were brought here from Europe. Sassafras was, I believe, was vine. Cedar was south. And of course, race. Okay, well, I'm a historian, sorta. If I don't know it, I tend to make it up. Sometimes I call our company History Making Productions, and sometimes I call it Making Up History Productions. But it's the beauty of being a filmmaker. So all these streets were named except for High Street, which is Market. But Penn wanted to assert his proprietorship. He's the proprietor. This is really an important concept. He's not a colonist. He owns the land. And in order for him to monetize the $16,000 payment that the king wanted to reflect in his appreciation for the work that Admiral Penn did in the war with Holland, a war that, by the way, was not about religion, one of the few times that was the case. It was totally a commercial war. And on the conclusion of the war, when the Dutch surrendered, they surrendered all their territory in the New World, which basically was New Amsterdam, parts of Virginia, all of Maryland, and not Maryland, all of Pennsylvania, and there were other territories. So the English basically consolidated from New England all the way to Virginia, and now they are the main players. And as Alan Guelzo noted, to the north were the French in upstate New York and in Canada, and south or west were the Spanish. So those were the three places, the three nations that were present. So Penn needs to get money. He's got 5 proprietorship manors in Philadelphia region. He still has property in England. He's got family in England. He needs money. The only way he's going to get money is if he turns this land into cash. And he becomes what I like to call the Toll Brothers of the 17th century. Today, if you buy a house from the Toll Brothers, they throw in a microwave. Penn threw in 5,000 acres in the Marion Tract, the Welsh Tract. He also said that if you didn't use the land within 3 years, it went back to him. Now, one of the great ideas that was expressed was the idea of these big squares. 3rd Street, 4th Street, Walnut to Chestnut, you bought that. And the idea was put your house in the middle and it'll be a nice, clean country town. But the people who bought those squares had their own idea about monetizing their assets, and they cut little alleys into those squares and sold those alleys to other people, who then cut alleys into their squares. So what you ended up with was a city in which a wealthy family would own a home. Their servants, indentured or otherwise, would be in property behind them. Other workers would be on the street. And very shortly after Penn started the colony, it became quite literally and figuratively a cesspool. People drilled wells to bring water out of the ground. Right next to the wells, they put their privies. To say the least, 100 years later, when yellow fever struck Philadelphia, many people believe that yellow fever was created by the contaminated water. Those of you who have ever stood in front of Society Hill Towers know that it's called Dock Street. And actually what Dock Street is a covered creek called Dock Creek. And if you travel from Delaware Avenue up Dock, you'll see it's a cobblestone street that veers off to the right behind the Mercantile Building up to 3rd Street, where there's a big cavern, if you will, in the ground, which is where the creek actually ended. And where that creek was eventually became tanneries. And every day when a tannery would finish skinning an animal, it would toss its carcass into Dock Creek. Over time, Dock Creek became probably not really a great place to be, smell-wise or otherwise. But Philadelphia became a place where there were sailors because it was a port. Penn came back in 1701, saw prostitution, saw all kinds of things, crime. We had more people in jail in 1701 than any other colony because of the human qualities that emerged into the colony. So there was always this conflict. William Penn, the lawgiver, William Penn, the creator of this place of religious, I think toleration is a word that we use in the 20th, 21st century that meant something very different in the 17th and early 18th century. In any case, he only actually is here during a 77-year life on 2 occasions, totaling not more than 40 months. William Penn never thought of himself as a New Worlder. He was an Englishman. And his major political fight which was about real estate, was with Lord Baltimore over the boundaries of Maryland and Pennsylvania. A dispute that lasted until the late 18th century when Mason and Dixon were commissioned to actually take the grants to both Maryland and Pennsylvania and survey them, and that became the famous Mason-Dixon line. So Penn, who was very effective as a politician in the court of the British king, spent most of his time there negotiating and wheeling and dealing and trying to build allies in favor of his interpretation of that grant, which ultimately they were successful in doing. He was always broke, always broke. He ends up in the later part of his life in prison, in debtor's prison. His agent, Philip Ford, took a case against him and won the claim that he owed him £8,000, and Penn had no money of any kind because he was always spending it to maintain his proprietorship, to take care of his various properties, to handle the workings of his various businesses. And by the way, Penn was a slaveholder, as were all, many Quakers. The origin of the anti-slavery, which of course is a Germantown initiated thing, is not an English Quaker. I'm not sure exactly what Pastorius was, but it's Daniel Francis Pastorius who organizes Germantown into the first anti-slavery movement. And so I thought what would be kind of cool next would be to take a little look at Pastorius.
To a peaceful partnership.
Kind of world than the one that Penn imagined.
The capital city comes to life as the streets crowd with carpenters and merchants, brewers and brickmakers.
There was an early investor in that colony, George Guest, who was given land to create a brickyard, and it lasted for a while.
And lots of business came through the city of Philadelphia. That included china, gold, silver, and of course, the dreaded human being.
In 1684, less than 2 years after the founding of Philadelphia, 150 enslaved Africans arrived to be sold at auction.
Many people look at Philadelphia and they think of freedom. They think of liberty. The Quakers were some of the biggest financiers of the slave trade. William Penn owned slaves.
Is it a question of simply being a man of his times? Does that spiritual equality not embrace everyone? Do the civil liberties that he's working towards not embrace them all?
These questions haunt the holy experiment. By 1693, there are hundreds of slaves in Philadelphia. They socialize in the city's public squares. But that year, the governing committee issues an order. Any slave found in public without the master's permission will be publicly whipped with 39 lashes.
Over time, issues of wealth, greed, often displaced the founding principles of sharing, of tolerance, and of communal engagement.
The Quakers come to make money, and slavery goes right along with it. And eventually you have to decide whether or not money is more important than ethical purity.
While William Penn remains absent from his colony, Francis Daniel Pastorius, the founder of Germantown, assumes the moral authority.
When Pastorius gets here, he wonders, what are these Quakers doing? These are Quakers who are supposed to be imagining that all human beings are equal, and yet they're holding slaves? This doesn't make any sense.
Pastorius sees hypocrisy in Quaker slaveholders. He insists, above all else, that slavery is evil.
Pastorius says to Philadelphia friends, in Germany we don't make slaves of people you do here. And you make slaves of people on the basis of race. That's not a Christian thing to do.
He recruits fellow German immigrants to sign the Germantown Quaker Petition Against Slavery, the first abolitionist document in North America.
It's a Quaker city, Philadelphia, certainly, but it opens the doors for religious freedom that now is enjoyed throughout the country.
What Penn did was to create the most diverse city in the colonies.
Penn's absolute authority protects religious dissidents from English law, turning Philadelphia into a haven for seekers and outcasts. Among the most radical of the new arrivals is Johannes Kelpius, a mystic philosopher from Transylvania.
Kelpius is one of the early benefactors of William Penn's great experiment for religious freedom. He and his Society of the Woman in the Wilderness came to the Wissahickon to ride out the end of days.
Kelpius and his flock build caves in the woods around Germantown and proclaim that the world will end in 1694, a lifestyle that would be heretical in any other colony.
Kelpius believed that bringing together a community of very devout, pious, celibate, and even vegetarian in some cases would hasten the pace at which the end of time would come. They built the first observatory in North America on the roof of their tabernacle, and they looked at the stars every night to read the signs of the coming of the Lord.
As Kelpius and his followers hide from society, a fiery evangelist named George Keith attacks it. Like Pastorius, Keith sees the Quaker merchants around him as morally adrift and greedy.
He will not keep his mouth shut. At one point, it turns to physical violence, and the Keithians try to take over a Quaker meeting house. It's barred against them, padlocked, and they come with axes, and they beat down the doors, trample inside.
This divides Philadelphia society for the next 20 years, and some of the Keithian advocates will later end up members of Christ Church, Anglican, or Baptist, or Mennonite.
Balance of power tips away from a Quaker colony.
After a 15-year absence, Penn returns to Philadelphia in 1699 with his wife, Hannah Callowhill Penn. But they find a city stunningly transformed, and the founders' authority compromised.
Pennsylvania bolts away from the leash on which William Penn wants to keep it and develops in its own fashion.
We are looking at a lawless city. We had the highest incarceration rate of any American colonial city, higher than Boston, higher than New York. They couldn't believe the kind of deviant behavior they saw in the streets.
In 1701, Philadelphia's assembly protests Penn's absolute control. He seeks a compromise and drafts a charter of privileges, establishing the first democratically elected legislature in North America.
I will say that it probably would have been better for us to just simply define the region as Mount Airy. It so much better captures Philadelphia. Anyway, here's the concluding part of the program.
At certain times of his life, could walk into the royal court of England, and he was willing to risk all of it to create a place that would represent the Quaker ideals in the world.
Who founded New York City? Who founded Boston or Chicago? The answer is, I don't know. Nobody cares. That's the point. But this is still William Penn's town, and he sits up there, and we walk around literally in his shadow.
I really don't think that there are any other cities that identify with their founder to such an extent that they would put a much larger than life statue of him atop their great municipal building. It's kind of funny, and it's kind of perfect. It's so Philadelphian.
He names his city for that future that he envisions, which both inspires and dogs Philadelphia throughout its history. It becomes a standard to shoot for, it becomes an identity, and it becomes a yardstick against which the city's inevitable shortcomings are consistently measured.
It doesn't just mean city of brotherly love. Nobody knew during Penn's lifetime that religious freedom would come to be the norm. Nobody knew in Penn's lifetime that democracy would come to be the norm. Philadelphia means a better world.
When Penn dies in 1718, Philadelphia is the fastest growing city in North America. His holy experiment has nearly bankrupted him, yet he has set an extraordinary place in motion.
A couple of things I want to just mention. I sat this, maybe yesterday, it was probably last week, but I sat with somebody and they wanted to have me explain to them our style of documentary filmmaking. And I clicked on Ken Burns's Roosevelt, which I happen to love and I think is obviously fascinating. But the first image that came on the episode that I put on the screen, as soon as the image came on, I said, 1, 2, 3. I got to 19. The image of a black and white photo of Wall Street where Roosevelt was a young guy. 19 seconds. I said, look, my generation will watch that image for 19 seconds. My kids have already changed the channel. So the style of documentary, by the way, our shows, and I use that word, the mindset of making a show is a very different one than the mindset of making a documentary film. And what it does is it makes you think all the time about the audience. I don't think Ken thinks that way. I think Ken thinks about how I can make it more beautiful, how I can make it more informative, how I can provide you with more information, how I can make you impressed with how well written it is, all of which is great. And everyone in this room, I suspect, to some extent, will watch on PBS a documentary film for 2 hours. The 4 kids that I raised, who were really smart kids and for whom I paid extraordinary amounts of money to go to private schools and private colleges, would otherwise today be a relatively wealthy person, these kids don't watch anything that's not fast. So the style that you see here is fast. You don't see any of these talking heads for more than 10, 15 seconds. The narrative lines, the narration that's written, which is expressed by Michael Boatman, who's our narrator, never more than 2 or 3 sentences. The idea is to keep moving. And every time I watch it, I always see things I never saw before. I saw an image today I'd never seen before of a still image of a piece of art of a beheading of somebody. I had never seen that. And I think that's one of the reasons why, now with Ken and the traditional documentary series that you watch, you get time. You get to see it. You know, I remember there's a shot that's 27 seconds in America's Greatest Idea, which is this Ken's film about the national parks. It starts at the top of a tree. It comes down the tree. It's a redwood. It's a big tree. It gets to the bottom, and in the very small, at the end of the very small shot, John Muir, he's got his hat on and he's smoking a pipe and he's sitting at the trunk of the tree. 27 seconds. Now, I don't know, but I think in the age of Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, that's a very complicating strategy for acquiring audiences. And if you want to, and I say this to you, all of you who are faculty and who teach, the pressures that I see on higher ed today, the cost structure of higher ed, the loans that students have to incur in order to get through higher ed, and the jobs and economics that are waiting for them when they graduate are colliding. And there's an implosion going to come. And so the value proposition of being a great author and scholar and lecturer, I use the word great when I use the word lecturer advisedly, is going to have to give way to also being a great entertainer. And I use that word advisedly. I look at the teaching company which produces courses for college level, for great courses. My daughter Elizabeth, who's a nurse in New York and is pediatric oncology and is a saint, went to Penn and took a course in her senior year that she had to take on the history of World War II. My dad, who was then alive, audited the course with his granddaughter. I paid about $3,500 for the course, prorated over my tuition bill from Penn that year. My dad paid $500 to audit it. Tom Childress taught it. He's a great military historian at Penn. And I bought the course from the teaching company for $69.95. Same course. I had no student interaction. Nobody read my papers. I didn't have to write any. But what we're trying to do here is to make history accessible, interesting, hopefully on occasion inspirational, and to acquire audience. And audience acquisition or student acquisition are both similar challenges for people who are trying to educate. So I'm very proud of the way this has gone. If you watch any of our earlier films, I can't. They suck. And we're trying to fix that. We're going to go back and redo episode 1. One of these days I'll actually watch it again, but I have a hard time watching it. I think it would be like anything that you did for the first time. Those of you who are PhDs, if you read your first serious term paper, you probably would throw up. And that's kind of my reaction to episode 1 of Great Experiment. As Katie said, we're doing 3 more series. The Great Experiment is, I like to equate it to your freshman college course in Philadelphia history. It's your survey course. It goes wide, does not go deep. If you like Philadelphia history in your sophomore, junior, and senior years, you take more advanced courses that are deep and not wide. So we have 3 series that are in play. One is called The Women of Philadelphia, which is a product of our own recognition that finding the stories on the role that women played in the city's history by relying on the scholarship that came out of the 19th and 20th century is extremely difficult, because most of that scholarship was created by white men who thought that the way to tell history was to talk about the things that other white men did. History until, I don't know, I'm actually a graduate student online in history, so I'm learning things. I learned a word called historiography. Didn't know what that was. It's not the most interesting course I ever took, but the idea that sometime, maybe in the mid-19th century, maybe it was Marx or somebody, history became more specialized. And only in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s did gender or women's history take into effect. So it's a pretty young field. And as we were doing this film in the very early stages, we were having a really hard time finding quality scholarship on which to rely to tell stories to bring women into the show. So we've tried to do that. We're doing better at it, I would say, but we're going to devote 6 separate episodes to the stories of women during the American Revolution, during the antebellum period, an episode on the Civil War to the Centennial, the Progressive Era, and then post-World War II movements, and finally an episode called Threading the Needle, which is the story of women in the needle trades and in the garment industry. Thirdly, we're doing a series called Urban Trinity, the story of Catholic Philadelphia. And we're producing that in expectation of Pope Francis's visit here on September 25th through the 27th. The show will be presented at the World Meeting of Families on September 23rd and broadcast by 6 ABC on September 24th. That's cool is a good way to describe it, because I grew up in Philadelphia in Winfield. I went to Samuel Gompers Elementary and Har Zion Temple, but the institution that most engaged me was St. Joseph's University, then college. And the part of that institution that most interested me was the St. Joe's Hawks and Jack Ramsey. And I grew up in the neighborhood. Across the street from my school, there was something called the Cardinal's House. I didn't know what a cardinal was. But by the way, John Kroll had a putting green in the back of his house, and we would break into the back there and use our baseball bats to play golf. But I thought I grew up in a Catholic city. And in terms of looking back, I now know I did. When we talk about Philadelphia as a city of neighborhoods, we're really talking about a city of parishes. When we talk about this gritty character that we assign to ourselves, whether it's something we can be proud of or something we are embarrassed by on occasion, we're talking about ethnic characteristics, largely Catholic. That, of course, is changing again as more Latino, Asian, African Catholics are moving to the city. The plight and path, the narrative arc of Philadelphia's economics, traces the narrative arc of the Archdiocese. Why are they in so much financial trouble? Because deindustrialization and suburbanization tore at the fabric. It's an interesting story. And there's some really interesting characters. It's not about religion the common denominator is about a group of people who happen to all be Catholic, so it's going to be pretty cool. And then lastly, we're starting a new series on what we hope will be interesting, on innovation. We don't tend to think of ourselves as innovative, but if you actually think about, well, why call this Philadelphia the Great Experiment? It's because as a product of our function as a region and a city, we became America's R&D lab. People used to come up to me as I started this project and say, did you know that Philadelphia was the first city in the country to, and then fill in the blank? Well, yeah, but that really wouldn't make for a great movie, would it, if we listed all the firsts? But if you think about those firsts in the context of function, what we became is the place where ideas and ideals were tested, often exported, often lost. Whether it was the first computers at Penn, we could have been the Silicon Valley, but those computers, that computer system that was developed at the engineering school at Penn was for military purposes. We were the capital of graffiti. We exported that. But we were also the capital of mural arts, and we've exported that. So all through the history of the city, good and bad, things were tried here first. Sometimes we were able to capitalize, sometimes we lost. But I think that's an interesting function. That innovation has its most prolific roots in the 19th century in a city of engineers. And engineering here was a product of the railroad. The Pennsylvania Railroad needed engineers. They needed engineers, they needed architects. Frank Furness's buildings, most of which have been torn down, were commissioned by the Pennsylvania Railroad. At one time, the largest corporation in the world. The needs of the railroad required the creation of locomotives. Baldwin became the major manufacturer of locomotives. The Inquirer building now, to become maybe a casino someday, is the station where Baldwin existed. And from 13th to 20th, and from Callow Hill to Spring Garden, the entire area was populated with factories that supplied goods to Baldwin Locomotive. William Sellers, who was head of the Franklin Institute, was the person whose Precision Tool and Die Company created the standardization of railroads that made possible the linkage of Pennsylvania, the Baltimore and Ohio, and the Reading. And Philadelphia, the Franklin Institute, before it became a museum, was the place where all these engineers gathered to exchange ideas and papers. And one of those ideas was to help create Mawbridge's still imagery into moving pictures. So our first series on innovation will be about Philadelphia's role in creating the motion picture industry. So those are the things that we're doing, and in answer to Katie's earlier question, I'm pleased today to announce that I will be a candidate for mayor. Ha ha ha. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. I may or may not be a candidate for mayor, but I was going to announce it at the Lutheran Theological Seminary, where there would be no press, and it would make a lot of sense. Anyway, thank you for having me. I'm happy to answer your questions.